is about. So, but first, let me do some geography for you. Let me share the link. I'm sorry, share the screen with you, and I give credit to World Atlas for the map because I need you to see. And it's not a specific country that I'm going to be addressing. No, it's just writ large Africa as a whole. So you'll see I know it's a smaller screen here. This is starting from all the way from the Mediterranean. There's Morocco, Tunisia, and so forth, all the way down to South Africa, Lesotho, and Swaziland. So what's interesting about the continent of Africa geography is because it is defined by what? Its diverse landscapes. So you have the mountains, the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. You have Kilimanjaro in the southern part of Africa. You have the desert like the Sahara. You have the large river systems like the Nile and Congo. All of this is what it's included in Africa. This is why I wanted to do geography for you. Because Africa, as I said earlier, is defined by its diverse landscapes that includes the vast deserts like the Sahara Desert, which is in southern Morocco, that is, and parts of Algeria on the other side, and Libya and so forth. Then you have large river systems like the Nile and Congo, and major lakes like the one, Victoria Lake is very, very known. And there is almost a prominent plateau in Africa. Africa is also the world's second largest continent, bisected by the equator, and it is home to diverse biomes, including rainforests, savannas, and highlands like the Ethiopian highlands, or highlands that is. So key features that includes the Great Rift Valley and mountains like the mountain of Kilimanjaro. Very, very interesting aspects for you to understand at least these aspects of the geography of Africa. And again, I'm going to just be brief into this, even the history aspects of it. I will be brief into this. Now, when it comes down to the history of Africa, first of all, I need to let you know there are about 54 countries in Africa. When I say 54, I am referring to the ones that are officially recognized by the United Nations. Of course, some sources may include an additional territories within Africa to varying degree of recognition. However, they are not recognized officially, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. Except that what you need to know is that the 54 countries, it's the standard number for independent and sovereign state. That is very, very known. So this is what's important about this part here. Now, for the history of Africa, when you think, I'm going to share a map with you that goes back to, I hope I have it here. Oh, I forgot to put the map, but I can just bear with me here a second. I'm going to upload it quickly here because you need to see this map. This map was drawn back in 1910. That's how far back it goes, right there. So why is this important? Because this historical map of Africa shows the possessions of the different European powers back in 1910. And this is what I'm going to be detailing a little bit more about the history of Africa that I believe will be worth you knowing. So, but I'll start with one fundamental statement. Whether you agree with it or not, it's up to you. But I've read it in many different sources. And that one is, as for Africa, majority of scientists, when I say scientists, I'm referring to archaeologists and so forth, they all have formally concluded that Africa is the birthplace of mankind. What do you think? Is it true or not? Please just say yes or no in the chat box. Is Africa, in your opinion, based on what you know, is Africa the birthplace of mankind? So, and I'm going to continue in my conversation here, but I will see your Francis Tango, you say yes. Muhammad Mazhardin, you say no. That's fine. Truth Seeker, you say yes. Son of Albi, I'm sorry, it's moved, the screen moves faster. You say Ibrahim Abbas, you say yes. Al Stalukin, you say yes and no. It depends. Yeah, there's back and forth. That's why we're just sharing the knowledge here. So now, as large of a number of humans like fossils were discovered nowhere else but in Africa. So we're found on African continent. And those fossils are dating back some 3.5 million years ago. So if you are to go back about 1.7 million years ago, early man spread out sort of throughout parts of Africa. And they became, just to survive, they had to become aggressive hunters, because they lived in caves back then and used fires once they learned how to develop it. And their ability to create stones as tools just to survive. This is what's important. Then you think about some about 200,000 years ago, sort of the first inhabitants in northern Africa. That's where they were. And across some parts of the southern European continent. So there is also clear evidence that they had control of fire because they learned how to do it. They lived in caves because they managed to protect themselves from the elements. And of course, they had some sort of learn how to make vegetables and farming and so forth. So one of the most important, at least according to historical record, and I will share the link with you later on, important developments of a primitive man was the creation of stone tools. And this by about 5000 BC, before coming here. Farming was somewhat common in northern areas of Africa, northern part of the continent. So as people were growing crops and herding their livestock, this is part of what happened back then. So then you go into the ancient African history, and this starts in about 3200 BC. And what is well known in this part of this era in the history of Africa was the Egyptian culture that emerged. So because Egyptian civilization did bring a lot of changes to Africa. I know there is always that controversial issue whether Egypt is an African country or is a Middle Eastern. Why Egypt is in Africa? I have no idea why they keep calling it a Middle Eastern country. Egypt is not a Middle Eastern country, in my opinion. But that's my opinion, so I respect yours. Suffice it to say that the Egyptian culture emerged along the lower reaches of the Nile River. This is why the Nile River plays a major role in the history of Egypt. And it was amongst the earliest civilizations. So, and that's where those tools that were made of bronze and all that became part of the Egyptian culture. So Egyptians developed, of course, not all of them, because even though some historical record mentioned that, which I have to question that, mentioned that Egyptians developed mathematics. I have to challenge a little bit that, because it was the Persians, especially Al-Khwarizmi, that developed the algorithm and so forth. That doesn't mean Egyptians did not evolve in mathematics. So they did to a degree. There were also some innovative systems of medicine, irrigations, and agricultural production techniques. The writing, the hieroglyphic writings, of course, was part also in Egypt, and also the first ships were developed within the Egyptian civilization. So suffice it to say that the Egyptians left a lasting legacy upon the world from that time back then. Then around 600 BC, and we are moving towards modern day, 600 BC, the use of metal, that's the metal tools spread across the area, and mainly in North Africa. So, and gradual spreads all the way to South Africa. But then you have the Phoenicians when they came to power, an enterprising maritime trading culture. The Phoenicians were known, and this culture, this maritime, by the way, just for you to know, it took from Lebanon, modern day Lebanon, and spread all the way across the Mediterranean. Let me show you the map here, just to put things in perspective for you. So all the way from you look at across the Mediterranean, all the way in this area here, from Lebanon in the Middle East. So and from 1500 BC all the way to 300 BC. So this is when this maritime trading took place. And according to historical record, in 1814 BC, they founded the city of Carthage. Where is the city of Carthage located in modern day? Does anybody know which country? It's when now. It's in Arabic. Or Carthage. Carthage or Carthage. Which country? Algeria. No, good try. I'm glad you tried, but no, Jigda. Which other country? I'll give you a hint. Is in North Africa, of course. Oh, Infidel, you got it. Infidel, you got it. In Tunisia. In Tunisia, the city of Carthage. It's well known, especially among the North Africans, or some people who study history will know. So suffice it to say, the Carthage city was established in Tunisia in North Africa. Only, here's the interesting aspect, only to be destroyed by the Romans in 146 BC. Because remember, the Roman Empire expanded all the way from Sevilla. That's where my ancestors came from. Sevilla in Spain, all the way to the other side of the world. So they crossed through everything. So what's important about this, and the reason I wanted to bring, and I'm not going to go through this because literally I will need about 5 hours to cover all this. So I'm going to be just brief, very, very, very brief in this. Suffice it to say, I'll mention a few historical aspects to put things in perspective. So you think about the Egyptians continued their spread of their culture across Northern Africa back then. And of course, through this, the kingdoms were created. And where were created? And a lot of people do not know the history, for example, of Ethiopia. Ethiopia used to be a kingdom. So they were created in two, in Ethiopia and Sudan. So however, at that time, the growing Roman Empire continued to expand its influence. And in 30 BC, Egypt became a province of Rome. Morocco became also a province of Rome in 42 AD. This is why understanding the history of Africa will put things in perspective for you. Sadly, for us, when I say us, I'm referring to Washington. Politicians have no clue about history prior to structuring or formulating a policy towards the country. We did the same mistake when we invaded Iraq. And I remember I argued in a report, you do not want to invade Iraq. First of all, you need to understand the history of that country. And my sort of advice was ignored. We all know the outcome of that. So now you have to think about the fall of the Roman Empire. And when this starts, that was almost during the time of the Middle Ages began. That's when the Roman Empire collapsed. And who came after it? The Arabs quickly took their place on the continent. So the Arabs came over and took over. Because remember, the Roman Empire was extended from Sevilla, in the eastern part in Andalusia, that is in Spain, all the way to almost closer to Southeast Asia to a degree. So, and in 698, 700 AD, they invaded Tunisia or Tunis and Carthage, and soon controlled the coastal North African area. This is in the map right here. You see it. So this is Tunisia right here. This is Tunisia, a small country. And Carthage is right here on the coast. It's not here. You see Tripoli and you see Tunis. Tunis, the capital. So Tunisia is the country. So just for you to understand the difference there. So, and the Arabs were, of course, Muslims. So, and most of North Africa, of course, at that time converted to Islam. Ethiopia was the exception. So a lot of people do not sort of realize that one. So some kingdom emerged in Africa writ large. So, and that is when they traded with the Arabs using gold plus some sort of valuable commodities. So there is, however, one particular aspect during this time, which was the slavery. So one of the first kingdoms during that time was none other than Ghana, so which is located in what is now southeastern part of Mauritania and western Mali. Let me bring up again the map. I don't know if you see. There is Mali, there is Mauritania. And Ghana, that's where it was located. So the empire grew rich from the trans-Saharan trade in gold and salt, but then lost its power in the 11th century. You should know what happened in the 11th century. So this is what's important to understand these aspects of it. Then you have, as I mentioned again, additional kingdoms were emerged, like Benin and Mali. Both became rich also through trading, not war, not invasion, not conquering other countries, is through trade. So, and mainly they were trading in gold and salt, and of course slavery, because that's when at that time slavery took off and it became part of the trade. So, and most of the kingdom, like most of them before them on any continent for that matter, not just in Africa. So they were invaded and then destroyed. That's just part of the history. So I'm going to bring one city that you should know about it. It's Mogadishu in Somalia. You all remember the movie Black Hawk Down. I had a colleague who was there at that time, and it wasn't a pretty scene. And of course, what do we expect? We go to countries and invade and I think they're going to welcome us with open arms? No, it doesn't work that way. So Mogadishu, why is that important? Mogadishu, which is now the largest city in Somalia, was settled by Arabs first, not Somalis. They were Arabs who traveled and traded on the east coast of Africa. And as a matter of fact, the Arab, and I remember this way back when I read history, remember they reached as far as Zanzibar. It's well known, which was used at that time as a base for travels between Middle East or Western Asia and India. That's how far back it goes. So then you think about, of course, the Cape of Good Hope. Then you have the River of Congo and so forth. So, and again, I'm going to just be brief on this. Suffice it to say, I have to talk about the African colonization because it's very, very important to understand, because where Africa is today and trying to free itself from the shackles of colonialism, and yet the collective West does not want it to do that. This is why, I mean, if you are an African, you'll be asking yourself, why the heck America all of a sudden is interested in Africa? So you go back to 16th century, and that is where sort of certain changes on the ground start to take place in Africa. And this, of course, came or began with the emergence of the Europeans. Europeans doing what? They weren't doing trade. They were trading in slavery. So they took the African slave, transport them to America for profit. So a slave purchased on the African coast for the equivalency of 14 English pound, the equivalency of $14. So, and sort of entered into bartered good could sell for about 45 pounds in the American market. So it's a dark, for us to learn, it's a dark history, but we can't shy away from not stating that. So, and this is one of the important aspects to it. So this is why the British, because there is best known method of commerce at that time. So, and it's called the triangular trading system. Remember this. If you ever come across in your reading, you see the term triangular trading system, that means Britain, Africa, and the US in a form of triangle. That's what it means. So it involved British and other European countries manufacturing goods, which were shipped to Africa, then slaves from there to the West Indies, and then sugar and other products back to Europe. This is why, for example, France is pissed now. Macron is kind of pissed why he was kicked out of Sahel. Why? Because he has no access anymore to raw material to fuel the French economy. And this is why you're seeing France going down. And as a matter of fact, the whole European economy is collapsing. And I will do a video for you in due time about that one. So then you think about from 16th century all the way to 19th century. Why is this important, this time frame? Because an estimated 800,000, between 800,000 to 1.2 million people were taken captives as slaves. So, and of course, the pirates were also involved in these ventures, that is, impacts on the continent. And that one really picked in the 17th century. So, and this is where you have, for example, in the 16th century, you have the Portuguese settled in what is known today as Angola. And if you know anything about Angola, what is known for. Then later on, the Dutch found the colony in what is now known as South Africa. So you have the French, you have the British, you have the Dutch, you have the Portuguese. So, and there is where some strong movements start to emerge in the 18th century to fight this slavery. France, during this time, became one of the first countries to abolish slavery in 1794. Britain banned trade in slavery in 1807. So, but it was not officially abolished until 1848. So, and in some parts of Africa, as a matter of fact, slave-like practices continue to this day. It's sad to see or sad to hear about all this. So, and this is, again, when you think about Africa as a continent, this wholesale colonization of Africa by European countries began in 1814, to be exact. What I shared with you was pre-1814, because this is when the British snatched the Dutch colony of South Africa, carved that like a pie. Yeah, they looked at the country like a pie and started carving it out. So the Brits, the Dutch, French, German, and Portuguese, all of them grabbed all the valuable pieces. And of course, by the end of the 19th century, from Angola, let me see if you can see it on the map. I doubt it, but I'm going to see if I can point it for you. Now you won't see it here. It's a little bit south here. So Angola, all the way from Angola all the way to Zimbabwe, and from Botswana all the way to Niger. The continent was now all but controlled by European powers. So, and of course, in the early 20th century, became the land grab, because it continued. This land grab continued by the British. I remember watching a historical documentary about the what's her name, Elizabeth. She died of Britain when she flew to Africa. I mean, that was back then. That was part of this time frame when the British sort of snatched the land, because they continued to do this as Britain took control of Egypt. This is what's important to understand. Why there is a push by collective West against the development of Africa. So, and of course, in 1920, and I'll conclude with this. In 1920, the forced occupation of African lands began to sour in Europe. So, and change was about sort of over on the horizon. So Africans were also driven by their passionate desire for independence, and the movements for some became unstoppable. And by mid-century, the 20th century, most of the continent was independent, with Angola, because most of them, at least to my knowledge, for North Africa in the 50s, early 60s, but for Angola was the only exception. Its final independence took place in 1975. That's how far. Then come the post-colonial Africa, and this is where you start to have, for example, although Africa remained the world's poorest inhabited continent, there are many bright spots in this land for over sort of 1 billion people. Yeah, there's over 1 billion people. So, and over 2,000 languages. That includes dialects. So significant economic and social gains have some sort of took place, start to emerge to the surface. So over the last few years, when I say last few years, I'm referring to the few decades. And that's this kind of social gain and economic changes started with some South Africa, Nigeria, Morocco, and Egypt leading the way. This is why, for the case of North African, they wanted to kick France out. As a matter of fact, the case in Morocco now is trying to replace French language with English. And as a matter of fact, it's better to do so. So today, the 54 African countries have a great potentials. But this question must be asked. Can it change soon enough to meet the needs of its people? And this is exactly what I'm going to get into my analysis. Let me just play this clip here. Then we'll move on. Liking this video so far? Don't just be a watcher. Go ahead and hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And don't forget to tap the bell so you will not miss any of my videos or live streams. This way, you will be supporting a channel that stands for the truth and objective reporting. The choice is yours. Thanks for your support. Indeed. The United States all of a sudden is wanted to turn its attention to Africa. First of all, you have to think about the two countries, the other two, China and Russia. But mainly I'm going to talk about China, then I'm going to talk about Russia. So for China's developments in Africa, which, by the way, is characterized by one main aspect. And I'm going to share some pictures to make my point. Just look at the picture and reach your own conclusion. And what is characterized by this China's development in Africa is characterized by its role as Africa's largest trading partner and a major investor in its infrastructure. I know the IMF and the World Bank have been spreading these rumors of the debt trap by China. I'm here to tell you, based on facts, there is no debt trap, because I was aware of the case in North Morocco when China wanted to develop the city of Tangier, and Morocco was pressured by the United States, and the Moroccan government said to Chinese, no, we are not interested anymore. And what did the Chinese do? They said, okay, that's fine with us. You don't want it, that's fine. We moved on. So, which is by the mistake on part of Morocco, in my opinion. And speaking of Morocco, by the way, before I forget, do you guys know that Morocco has the fastest speed train in Africa? Speed train that we don't even have here in the United States. So can you imagine where Morocco would have been had it get involved with China's infrastructure development? It's never too late, but Moroccan government will have to make that decision. Suffice it to say that China's investments, and there is no this debt trap nonsense, because I'm going to show you images of infrastructure that is completed by the Chinese, in coordination with the local government. And China has always been a major investor in this infrastructure. And also there is a reason also why China's doing this. China's not doing it because he wants to. Every country, when it gets involved in projects, there is a reason for it. National strategic interest. China is no exception. And that is because China's demand for resources. China needs resources for its developing, for its economy. Look where China is today regarding the rare earth elements. And as I said last time, I am preparing a video for you, recorded one, by the end of this week. The editor is working on it, putting it together, in which China is choking, and I use the term, is choking the US regarding rare earth elements. As a matter of fact, this morning I just found out that the White House is reaching out to Malaysia for access to rare earth. It's going to become very, very tricky for Malaysia, because China and Malaysia are getting closer as far as infrastructure. And we know that the US wanted to use Malaysia, no more, no less. So to go back to my topic about Africa here, for China's demand for resources, the new markets, and of course, the geopolitical influence. This is what's driving the United States towards Africa right now. And the key projects that China has been involved in and developed and completed, we're talking about a major transportation infrastructure, like, for example, the Kenya Standard Gauge Railway. And I have a picture of this one here, right here. China developed the railway system inside Kenya, because Kenya didn't even have this before. China went ahead and developed it. So, in addition to other numerous developments of ports, as well as energy and IT projects. I had to read up an analysis by a think tank here in the US, and provided certain the involvements of the sectors. You look at all this, where the involvement is, and that should give you an idea where things are. And this is why you look at the investments that China and the offer, the opportunities, what these investments offer, these job opportunities for modernization, for also economic growth, but it also contributes to the growing or the growth of Africa. Of course, the West, and I know this for a fact, the IMF and World Bank will always include that trap into the narrative to mislead the masses. Sometimes you see it that way, sometimes you see it as a debt burden, when none of those exist. There is no debt trap and there is no debt burden. What China does, it'll come to the country, they sit down, they negotiate. Are you willing to take a loan? Here are the terms. If you are able to repay your loan, we'll move forward with it. If you are not, then we're going to have to figure something. As a matter of fact, I was aware of last year, China renegotiated its investments with some countries in Africa, restructuring that investments as far as the interest on it. The Russians have forgiven certain debts. China also did in some countries, to my knowledge. So when you think about Chinese involvements in Africa, for example, infrastructure, you think about the transportation. Like I always say, for an economy to develop, you need to have an infrastructure. So you look at what the Chinese have developed for certain aspects in Africa. Because China is the main founder and builder of transportation infrastructure, like railways, like highways, like ports. So that includes, and I'm going to show you a picture of Mombasa. This is in, I have one picture, first of all, of Zambia. This is in Zambia. So what you're looking at the yeah, this one that was developed in Zambia. There was the Chinese that built it, not the Americans. So. Then you think about the idea of the largest bilateral trading with the African continent. So you think about the foreign direct investments in Africa for the sake of improving infrastructure. And of course, China has reasons for getting involved into this. And that has to do with economic interests, the strategic interests, national interest, like every other country. But as long as it is done in a fair manner,